Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, there's a bunch of different Humble Bundles that look quite interesting. We're going to take a look at those. We're going to look at the Kickstarter for Zaminora, Ballad of the Witch. Sigil, Wizards of the Coast 3D virtual tabletop, appears to be all but dead. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I had the wonderful opportunity to run a first level Shadow of the Weird Wizard game. So I'm going to give some quick impressions of Shadow of the Weird Wizard based off of that one game. Today, we're going to talk about defending yourself out of the fun. How some players seek such high defensive capabilities that they essentially make the game and the threat of the game meaningless. And we're going to cover more questions from the Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. The Lazy RPG Talk Show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, scenarios, the whole separate podcast, the dedicated Discord server. They get so much that the patrons of Sly Flourish get, and they help me put on shows like this. To the patrons of Sly Flourish, thank you so much for your outstanding support. I often mention that Humble Bundles and bundles of holding are the best ways to get lots of material for a very low price. And there are three Humble Bundles going on right now, all of which are pretty tremendous. The first one is a Delta Green Humble Bundle with proceeds and I think even some matching that are going to help in Ukraine. Delta Green is a modern day Call of Cthulhu game. $25 gets you 58 items, less than 50 cents a book, or 50 cents an item. Of course, different items have different sizes for all of Delta Green, which includes a bunch of material for various virtual tabletops, including Roll20 and Foundry. You can find a link. I don't really know. I've never played Delta Green, so I don't know very much about it, but you can find a link down to the Delta Green Humble Bundle below. Looks quite reasonable. Lots of people are very excited about it. I just haven't played it, so I can't really say. So it comes with the Delta Green core book, which is called the Agent's Handbook, and a whole bunch of different stuff to play Delta Green. So if you are looking into, hey, a modern day Call of Cthulhu style game, and you want to help support Direct Relief, you can take a look at the Delta Green Humble Bundle. The next one, I picked this one up, this is the first time I think we've seen Wizards of the Coast doing a Humble Bundle. And they are doing a World of Dragonlance book bundle, which includes all of the main Dragonlance books. I don't know if it's every single Dragonlance book, but it's all of the main Dragonlance books coming to you in glorious non-DRM'd EPUB. So this is great, right? Like you can get all of these books available in EPUB that you can then put on any device or read on any platform that can read EPUB. EPUB is a standard ebook process. $18 for 26 books. So less than $1 a book, including the three main Dragonlance books. If you've never read them, they're certainly a read. I don't know how well they hold up these days, but I started reading them. They're fun. So if you want some good old D&D reads, this is a fantastic one. And $18 is an absolute steal for this many ebooks. So check out the World of Dragonlance book bundle, also available on Humble Bundle. And thanks to Wizards of the Coast for putting out material in a non-DRM'd downloadable format that you can download and own and keep. I would love to see more stuff like that. And then the last Humble Bundle I just found out about yesterday is a player-focused source material from Kobold Press. So it includes Deep Magic 1 and 2. It includes the Foundry license for Deep Magic, Vault of Magic, which are magic items, the Midgard Heroes Handbook, Zobek Clockwork City, which I really loved, the Southlands Player Guide, all 4 Warlock Grimoires. These are really cool books that encapsulate all of the material. So even though this is mostly focused on player stuff, there's actually a fair bit of GM stuff in here as well. But you don't get like probably the 2 books that I would love, but they're not in here. The Midgard World book and the Southlands book are outstanding. And there's other ones as well. Lots of separate Warlock. I actually have some stuff in here. I think one of these Warlock magazines includes one of the adventures that I wrote for them. And then a whole bunch of different smaller products that you can use to add new character options to your 5e games. So very good deal. This one is 44 items, $25, but it includes probably it looks like 5 or 6 really big books in PDF. So if you're looking for more character options, and one thing I always think about with these is they don't always have to be like just full character options. These are things that GMs can use to kind of modify their game. The Deep Magic 1 and 2, for example, have so many spells, more than like 1,000 spells that you can go dig into to find like one spell to drop onto a single item that the characters can use or to give to monsters and stuff like that. Zobek Clockwork City is an outstanding source book for the city of Zobek if you're running in Midgard. I have used the Midgard Heroes Handbook as one of the core handbooks. So I use Tome of Heroes as well, which is not one of the books that you got on here. Really cool bundle, very good rate. And you can find a link to that. That one is helping to support Make-A-Wish. So you can find that out in the show notes as well. So 3 big Humble Bundles. I think if you picked them up, you get like 150 books. That's a whole lot of stuff that you get. Zaminora. Zamanora, Ballad of the Witch. Grim tales inspired by Balkan and Slavic folklore for D&D 5e, D&D 2024, and the Legend in the Mist RPG. I don't know what Legend in the Mist is. It seems to be doing quite well. I've only just glanced at it, but I did say, hey, does it have a one-click preview? And the answer is yes, it does. You can click down, and I think it goes to a Google Drive. Where did it go? Free demo. Goes right to a Google Drive where you can open it up and take a look at it to see what it's like. And, oh, this is the spreads. I see. I thought I put Zaminora on. There it is. Good looking book. I did not have a chance to dive in too deep, but if you are looking for new options, new interesting things to drop into your 5e games, a new angle on it, then you can check this out and check out the free preview and see what you think of it. See of the extended, see what kind of material it's got. The artwork, they are a no AI company, so all of the artwork is generated by human beings for human beings, which I appreciate. Looks quite interesting. So I only just got it, so I have not had a chance to take much of a look, but it looks pretty cool as well. So that is the Zaminora Ballad of the Witch Kickstarter, available now. You can find a link to that down in the show notes and check it out and see what you think. So last week, or I guess, yeah, it was over last week, we first heard from Andy Collins that 90% of the team that was working on Sigil, the 3D virtual tabletop for Wizards of the Coast, were laid off by Wizards of the Coast, which pretty much spells doom for the 3D virtual tabletop known as Sigil. It's kind of funny because about a month ago or so, I had a show topic where I talked about the end of 1D&D. I kind of said that now that all 3 of the core books are out, we're sort of at the end of the 1D&D period from that first moment where they did that, 4-minute, 5-minute video talking about the future of D&D and what they were doing, and everybody's so excited. And really, there were sort of 2 main things that video talked about. One was the new core books, and 2 was the 3D virtual tabletop. And what I didn't expect was that the 3D virtual tabletop would be dead this quickly, but it is. What's interesting to me is when I was talking to people about it, almost nobody was surprised, right? Like really, there were very few people who were like, oh my God, I can't believe they killed it. It was really, and I think that's kind of the main point that I would reinforce to people is recognizing like what really matters to the industry and to the hobby and what doesn't matter to the hobby. And in my opinion, Sigil never really mattered to the hobby one way or the other. It was never going to change or revolutionize the entire tabletop role-playing game hobby. People were going to play however they play. And maybe it was one of many different virtual tabletops that people use, including 2 different 3D virtual tabletops that themselves and Tailspire, the other one. But it was never really going to have a big impact, in my opinion, on the hobby overall. So I don't think I ever even really talked about it on the show because I never really felt like it had anything that it was going to make an impact one way or the other. And one way to measure that impact is to say, well, now that it's dead, how much of an impact is there to the hobby? Like how much of the hobby is going to shrink because of it? And the answer is none, right? Like nobody really used it. So it's not really going to change the hobby that much. So that to me was kind of the big thing. But what was amazing to me is how much people brought up Sigil in conversations. And then how many people said, well, I'm not surprised when it dies. It was like we wanted something to talk about, right? And it's actually interesting because the last 2 or 3 weeks, we really haven't had any big news. Since the D&D 2025 Monster Manual came out, we really haven't had much RPG news to discuss. And then this happened, and now we have something to discuss. But it was actually kind of nice having 3 weeks where we just sort of focused back on our games again. So what's interesting is that, so many people kind of just, said, oh yeah, not surprised, right? Walk away. I think it really sucks for Andy Collins because this is the second time he's gotten fired from Wizards of the Coast while they were in the middle of building a 3D virtual tabletop. They tried to do the exact same thing back in 4th edition. In fact, it is fascinating. And I listened to it again for context. There are 2 Gen Con videos on YouTube with the 4th edition design team, including Andy Collins. I think Andy Collins is on both of them, where they were talking about what it was like working at Wizards of the Coast and working on D&D during the 4th edition times when there was a big push for electronic gaming and a big push to bring electronic gamers into D&D. And everybody knew that it kind of fell apart back then as well. And now it fell apart here. And what was really, kind of sad was hearing Andy on the panel talking about what it was like back then, and then being very excited for the fact that he'd been hired by Wizards of the Coast to now work on Sigil. And then it happens again. I mean, he's a smart dude. He can't be that surprised at something like this occurring, but it's never fun to watch 30 people get fired. So there's no part of me that's happy about that. I'm not happy about any of this, really. I don't know that, I don't think it's a good thing that it went away. I do wonder whether it was is it the second best outcome for Sigil? The best outcome would be that they actually build a nice tool that people like and enjoy, and it actually does, help a lot of people enjoy the game. But the next best outcome is they tried something, right? They tried something and it didn't work, and then they killed it. And I think in that whole sort of fail often, fail first, fail often kind of idea, I guess that's kind of what you want to do. I don't think that you necessarily want to hire 30 people and then fire 30 people. That's the part that really hurts. But if you think about it, when they first brought it up, when they first said that this is something they were going to do, I was actually pretty positive on it. And the reason why I was positive on it is I felt they're not just creating another virtual tabletop that's going to compete with Roll20 or Foundry or Fantasy Grounds. They're trying something completely different. Not totally completely, because there is Tailspire, another 3D virtual tabletop. But generally, there aren't that many of them. And I wouldn't say that Tailspire is very big. But it was a shot. And it was a company that had the resources to be able to really make an attempt at this. So I was okay, not a lot of people could put the capital forward required in order to really run a 3D virtual tabletop. So I thought from a businessy standpoint, it kind of made sense. Let's make something that's new that we can really do and see how it goes. But in my mind, there was one major problem with it. And that's that it required everybody that plays to have a powerhouse computer. And today, when a lot of people are on their phones, when a lot of people are on tablets, when there's a big mix of different computer hardware out there, expecting that every one of your players is going to have a big, beefy 3D rendering computer is too much. That alone should have almost stopped the whole thing, right? You're just never going to get that many people to be able to sit on that kind of client. Because all it takes is one player who can't play, and nobody can, right? Unless you're going to kick the guy out. Right? Nobody can play. So that alone was a big issue. And I think pretty early on, it's been more than a year since the summit. And at the summit, there were already a lot of questions how are you going to monetize this? And how exactly is it going to work? And people were yeah, it looks really cool. But they're all yeah, we all sat on these Alienware PCs that had these massive graphic cards in them to use it. And I think that was, that alone was a real limiting factor. So anyway, Sigil appears to be dead. They're still kind of waffling about, we're integrating some of the Sigil stuff into the rest of D&D Beyond. Nobody knows what that means. But really what I think it means is that Sigil as a concept is basically gone. And my only main point is I don't think it matters that much. It's an interesting topic to talk about, and it's kind of a fun thing for, we have the RPG business channel inside of our Discord server. We talk about stuff like this. But the reality is does it matter to the games that we're playing? Does it matter to the games we're playing that when we sit down with our friends? Not really. It's not a big boost. It's not a big drop. This kind of stuff doesn't matter. To me, the stuff that really matters, the stuff that we should be paying attention to, 5.2 system reference document, where is it? I'm waiting for the system. Hey, anybody from Wizards of the Coast, if you happen to be listening to this video, I would sure love an update on where we stand with the 5.2 system reference document. My understanding is that Wizards of the Coast is very interested in getting that out there so that more people will build D&D 2024 products. An example is there's the new Obajima is now available on D&D Beyond. Where is it? Obajima, Tales from the Tall Grass. This also is an interesting kind of joke for me. If you want to find out as a publisher what it takes to get your material published to D&D Beyond, start with $1 million. Obajima made $2.4 million at their Kickstarter, which is why which is why Wizards of the Coast is super interested in having Obajima put on their D&D platform, on the D&D Beyond platform. So again, it's like nobody really knows exactly how you get your material up on Obajima, or how you get your material up on D&D Beyond, but it sure likes having more than $1 million helps, which also gets me to my Wizards of the Coast won the OGL war, because a big thing that they wanted with the OGL was they saw all these massive Kickstarters and they said, boy, we'd sure like to get a piece of those massive Kickstarters. And now they do by saying, hey, we'll put you on D&D Beyond and we'll take a percentage. And they're like, sure, we'll put you on D&D Beyond. Why not? And then Wizards of the Coast gets a percentage. So turns out they got what they wanted after all, and they didn't have to ruin the OGL to do it. But they did apparently ruin the reputation in the process. One of the interesting things about Obajima is it is only available for D&D 2014. So that's a really weird thing. Like I was reading, I don't have a link to it, but basically there was a link to in the forums on D&D Beyond where they talked about how Obajima is integrated with D&D Beyond. And the answer is it only supports D&D 2014 because Obajima was written for D&D 2014. And the reason why is that there isn't a 5.2 SRD to write things for D&D 2024 yet. So my understanding is Wizards of the Coast definitely wants to get D&D 2024. They want more people to write material for D&D 2024, do more Kickstarters, make $1 million so they can figure out which ones they want to bring into the fold, then go to those and say, hey, how would you like to be on D&D Beyond? And then they go into D&D Beyond, and then Wizards of the Coast gets their percentage. So I know it's in their interest, but I really would love to see it too, because that is one where when the 5.2 SRD comes out, not only does it help Wizards of the Coast seed D&D 2024 rules out into other products so that they can figure out which ones to integrate in D&D Beyond, but it gives us more material that we can build products with for every system and every platform in any different way we want to go, whether it's going to D&D Beyond or not. We get all that new material that we want. So really interesting stuff. Anyway, that is what's going on with Sigil and D&D Beyond and Obajima and the 5.2 SRD. So the 5.2 SRD is one thing I'm looking forward to. The other thing I'm looking forward to is the new starter set, which is coming out in September. Those, I think, are things that Wizards of the Coast are doing that are really important and that will change the RPG hobby. And really everything else is books. And the books could be cool and the books could not be cool, but I don't think it's going to change the industry overall. So interesting stuff. On Wednesday, I have a regular game Wednesday, and on Wednesday, they're just about to get to like a great big boss fight, and I had 3 of my 7 players. So I have 6 regular players and 1 on-call player, and 3 of them couldn't make it. And I was like, man, the last time I ran 4 players in a really hard battle, they almost got wiped out. And I don't know if I want to do that again. So I asked the people that were coming and I said, hey, how would you guys feel about doing a single session Shadow of the Weird Wizard game? I really want to try Shadow of the Weird Wizard. I'm very excited about it. I missed my chance to play Shadow of the Weird Wizard at Winter Fantasy. How would you guys like to try it out? And they gracefully, my players said, sure, why not? We'll try it out. So we whipped up some first level pre-gen characters. I found some pre-gen characters. They're not great, so I don't really recommend them. But we got some first level pre-gens together. I got out the books. I got out a scenario called One Bad Apple, which is an introduction scenario, or what they call a quest for Shadow the Weird Wizard. We ran it, and we really enjoyed it. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of my experiences having run Shadow the Weird Wizard. Again, recognizing I've only played one game. So the first thing that came to mind is, at first level, and I warned my players about this. I was like, at first level, you're really only going to get a taste of what Shadow the Weird Wizard has. And it's not going to feel that much different than any other RPG that you're playing. Like, it's not showing the true, full richness and depth that exists with Shadow the Weird Wizard. So I wanted to give him a warning that, like, hey, here are the things you're really going to learn at first level in Shadow the Weird Wizard, which is essentially like how boons and banes work. That's pretty much it. Like, how do the abilities work? How do boons and banes work? And, maybe a couple of, like, how the character class powers are going to work among the 4 main character archetypes that exist. But the real depth of Shadow the Weird Wizard comes up as you play through the whole scenario. Once you get particularly to like 3rd level, where you start to pick up expert paths and master paths, that's where things really begin to fill out and you start to see the richness of the game. So Shadow the Weird Wizard is designed so that you run a campaign of about 10 sessions. It's intended that each quest is 1 session of a game. You run 10 sessions and you've now gotten from all the way from 1st to 10th level. You level each time, you get new abilities each time, and you're off to the races. I I think my players all liked it enough that we will play a campaign like that. My intention, though, is to be a little bit more relaxed and do like 2 sessions per quest. And then, so 2 sessions per level, and then do about 20-ish quests. I think I also like the idea of starting at 0 level and having like a little 0 level game where you have nothing but a background to begin with before you even pick up your path. And that way, when you're playing through it, that way I'll have a little bit more room. We'll have some time. We'll have a little bit more room to describe what happens during downtime. The idea is like you have a quest, which is sort of like, you know, the pinnacle of all of the excitement. And then you can describe sort of out of character what happens in between them. And they said there might be even like 2, 3, 4 weeks in between these sessions for downtime and for kind of descriptions of what happens to the characters. But for me, because I run 3-hour games, trying to do a scenario plus downtime in 3 hours and then constantly level, I think would be too much. And then looking at when I ran One Bad Apple, it's a pretty long quest, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes on. It's really cool, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on in it. And I ended up abbreviating it significantly by jumping straight to the dungeon. I basically said they got right to the dungeon. I gave them all the background of how they got there, and then I started up at the dungeon, and then we started in the dungeon and crawled, and it fit nicely into a 3-hour session. They finished the session, they got what they wanted, and we were done. But I know my own pacing, and I know I can read an adventure and get a feeling for how long it's going to take. And I could definitely tell that this scenario was going to take longer than, you know, I mean, it's even long for a 6-hour session. Like it could take a while. There's a lot of investigation that goes on. There's a lot of things that happen here. So I think they could really end up taking a longer session. So I think I would probably be more relaxed and have a quest take as long as the quest needs, and then have some downtime, level up, and then go to the next quest, rather than trying to like get everything to go into one session. So it really worked. It's a very D&D style. So this was, you know, when Rob Schwab wrote this, Rob Schwab wrote Shadow of the Demon Lord, which my group and I loved. And I had a friend of mine who just keeps coming back and saying like, oh man, I love Shadow of the Demon Lord. And so I'm excited to run this. And Shadow of the Weird Wizard is sort of a less super dark apocalyptic take than Shadow of the Demon Lord is. Still plenty of dark, gritty stuff going on in this game. But it's very much built like a Greyhawk style D&D sort of scenario, high fantasy Greyhawk D&D scenario, but definitely has some fun things going on in it, and some fun sort of traditional fantasy elements to it. A couple things that I noticed, there's probably two things that leapt out at me. One was, in all the conversations we've had about what to do with orcs, Shadow of the Weird Wizard has definitely a very different take on who and what orcs are. Instead of orcs being a species, orcs are essentially a curse that gets applied to humans. So they're actually more like gnolls in the D&D side. In D&D, traditional D&D lore, not necessarily Eberron or other worlds, but in traditional D&D settings, gnolls are formed by hyenas who have eaten the cursed remains of the victims of Yeenoghu. So Yeenoghu goes to a world. Yeenoghu's a great big gnoll demon lord. He kills a bunch of people. He leaves their bodies to rot in his wake. Hyenas follow along with Yeenoghu. They eat the cursed meat that's left over by the remains of those killed by Yeenoghu. And then the hyenas transform into gnolls. Right? That's sort of the traditional, and that's why gnolls are fiends in the 2025 monster manual and stuff like that. Now, in Eberron and in Midgard, 2 other worlds, gnolls are not like that. Gnolls are humanoid mammalian style creatures. So what's interesting is Shadow of the Weird Wizard took that take for orcs as well. That orcs in Shadow of the Weird Wizard are humans who have been cursed. They sort of physically transform into these brutish forms that are filled with bloodlust and going out there and murdering other people. So they're almost like the Ravagers from Firefly, right? They're humans who have been kind of cursed and now are out there and have this sort of thing in there. That's not a terrible way to go. But there's some cognitive dissonance that occurs with me where it's like, I almost rather wish he just called them something else. And I think that like, if you read that and you're like, the problem is that, it's just going to bring up the conversation of orcs again. You could just call them something else, right? That like, they're different enough from traditional orcs that I feel like you could have just made a new thing from that Shadow of the Weird Wizard could have made a new thing. But I do keep in mind that Shadow the Weird Wizard is intended to be a take on D&D. And as a take on D&D, and including old school D&D, I'll show some examples of that you want to have orcs in there. Now, could have orcs just been another species like anybody else? Like maybe. So it's interesting. And, if you dig it, you dig it. I don't know how I feel about it. I think I can run with it. I explain that way to my players because One Bad Apple kind of involves, the curse and people getting turned into orcs and stuff like that. I think I would want to feel my players out about that. I don't know that anybody would be like upset. It's just like, is that, you almost want to call them something else. Like my feeling is like, I'd almost want to just refer to them as something else instead of just calling them orcs, only because orc has become now this like label that we apply to this one thing. And it goes off. Yeah. Ariel here says that's not really that far off from Tolkien's orcs, which are sort of created. And yeah, I think that's, if you almost think of like the Uruk-hai, right? Who weren't called orcs, but I know the movies. It's been a long time since I read the books, and maybe orcs are the same way. But the idea that the Uruk-hai were like, bred out of vats down beneath the Saruman's tower. These orcs are kind of that way too. And it doesn't prevent you from having some of the orcs who manage to break away from their own bloodlust and now are sort of rebelling against the other orcs. Like you could still have fun kind of turns of events where, a group of orc manages to hang on to some of its humanity and now they're not as violent as the other ones. You could still drop that in there and it could still work out. I think it could still be kind of interesting. The other thing that I noticed, and is something that I definitely recommend taking a look at. So let me pull up Secrets of the Weird Wizard here. So this is in Secrets of the Weird Wizard, which is the GM's guide for Shadow the Weird Wizard. And it talks about the difficulty, setting the difficulty for various encounters and things like that. And one thing that's interesting is all of the quests. I really like this idea. So Robert Schwab refers to adventures as quests. And his intention is to say, like, these are really focused things that are built around an outcome, that there is a quest that the characters go on. And so quests are what he calls adventures, which I kind of like. It sort of narrows that focus down on exactly what you're supposed to be doing with these things. But one of the things is all the quests and the encounters are built by tier, not by level. So of the tiers, you have first and second level are your novice path. Then at third level, you begin to get your expert benefits, and that's third, fourth, fifth, and sixth level for expert. And then 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th are your master tier. And the encounter building guidelines and the tiers for quests are built along those tiers, which means first and second level are treated the same. What that meant was first level was really deadly. And I had actually heard, I went over to the Shadow the Weird Wizard or the Robert Schwab Discord server and talked to people there. And they said, yeah, watch out, it's really deadly. And it was. I killed a character. Like they were fighting a guy, and the dude did enough damage to like completely kill one of the characters pretty easily, a little bit too quickly. So one thing that I would definitely recommend, and it's just based on pure damage, a creature that does more than 2d6 damage on an attack is going to be particularly deadly at novice paths, even though the encounter building guidelines here, like we had 4 characters. So you can see the novice path, an average is 8 and a hard is 12, except, boy, I'll tell you, we had a challenge 8 monster, and that challenge 8 monster, it was one of the bone dudes. It was called a bone guard. And in this case, it was a bone guard champion. Who is, the Bone Guard champion is only a difficulty 8 creature, and they defeated it with, the defense and the health wasn't so bad. But because it does, and I think this guy, he has 2 attacks with a rune blade, and the rune blade does 3d6 damage. And a flesh and blood creature loses 1d6 health also. Damage and health is also really interesting. I'll talk about that in a minute. And if they become incapacitated from the attack, they die and their soul is trapped in the rune blade. So they're really lethal. And this Bone Guard champion killed one of the characters outright. It was really tough. I would be apprehensive about running creatures this high in your tier 1 novice quests. So it definitely appeared pretty deadly to me. And some people like that level of deadliness, right? There's that sort of like, well, how should you deal with this other than just go stand up and fight the guy, was definitely a question. I love how many different skeletons there are, right? Like they have these bone guards, which are essentially all of their like undead skeleton kind of things, but there's so many of them, right? There's just a whole lot. And you will find this throughout this, that there's just so many. I was talking about orcs before, and you can tell that like orcs are, let's see if I can find it in my new table of contents I'm so happy about. Hey, look at that. He piled so many monsters into this, right? So there's this whole thing on orcs, but you can see a ton of different orcs that are there. There's also rules for building your own monsters in here. Death orc, difficulty 8, death orc, orc warlord, orc doombringer, lots of different orcs. So big piles of monsters that are in here. Oh, so let's talk about health and damage. Health and damage is kind of interesting. So health and damage is a way for essentially separating out things like hit dice and death saves from damage. Essentially, your character has so much health. That's their maximum hit points is measured in health. So you might have a health of 14. When you take damage, you track your damage up. It starts at 0 and goes all the way up. When your damage hits your health score, you're incapacitated. You fall over unconscious from all of the wounds that you take. Any damage, and it caps out. It can't go higher. The amount of damage cannot go higher than your health. So whatever damage you took that hits you at your health level, it caps out then. Any new damage you take when you're unconscious starts to reduce from your health. And health is much harder to get. And when your health hits 0, now you're dead. So you start to have this cap at the top, and your damage goes up until it hits the cap, and then the cap starts going down until it hits 0. And when it hits 0, at that point you die. So it's an interesting way to kind of have death saves and have hit dice and other things that are sort of stuck in this other column and turning health into kind of two separate things. Another interesting bit is that traps almost always do damage to health, not damage. So it makes traps kind of deadlier, because they're almost all like they're draining your life, right? Your health goes down and you can't just recuperate from it the same way that you can recuperate from damage taken during combat. Part of the reason of that is the damage that you take during combat is considered to be pretty temporary. That it's sort of like exhaustion and other things. It's not true physical damage that your character has taken. So that I thought was a really interesting take on it. So I'm very excited. I just banged the mic. So I'm very excited for Shadow the Weird Wizard. I really enjoyed our first game. My players enjoyed it, even though one of the characters died. They still kind of had fun escaping from a really nasty situation. They tried it out. It's very easy to play. One thing that I really like about it is like the character sheet for it is really simple. And yet the complexity of the game is really high. So you only have to worry about like these 4 main ability scores and your health and stuff like that. Yet, as your character grows, you get lots of interesting stuff. It expands, so it feels rules light, but it doesn't stay. But it offers a lot of customization for players. One of the things that I'm looking forward to that you don't really get the feeling for in just a one-shot game is the sheer amount of customization. So you start off with your 4 main classes, right, of the fighter, the mage, the priest, and the rogue. But the minute you get to your expert tier, there's a whole ton of different expert paths. You can see them all here, like this giant list of expert paths. And you can pick any of the expert paths, right? You don't have to stay, even though they're kind of broken out by faith, power, skill, you don't have to pick you can pick from any of them. So it's almost like multi-classing twice. That as soon as you get to 3rd level, you multi-class once into making something, and then you're already pretty unique because you're like, oh, I'm a fighter, but I'm also a psychic, right? Or I'm a priest, but I'm also an assassin, right? You can mix those two. And then when you get to level 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And when you get to level 7, the master paths, there are it looks like 100 of them, right? There are like tons and tons of master paths. So yeah, there are so many different paths that you can take in this game that every character is going to be super customized. And that's not even including like the backgrounds that you pick too, which are kind of saying like, what are the other things that you do in the world? And you can add new backgrounds as you go as well. You can learn new backgrounds during your downtime. So the character customization is through the roof, all with a single book, right? All with just this one book. You don't have to buy book after book after book with all new ones. Although I'm sure Robert Schwab loves to write, and I'm sure we'll see more of those. But just with this one book. The amount of customization is tremendous. But also the game is very simple. I don't feel like you need an online character builder in order to build characters for it. You can really do it with just pen and paper, and I don't think it's hard at all to get started. I think it's really, really cool. So I love it. I can't wait to play it again. I'm excited to play a new version of it. It's a very exciting RPG. And there's something really cool about playing an RPG that's this well produced. It is a tremendously well produced role-playing game. It looks beautiful. It looks as good as any RPG you were going to buy on the shelf. But it all comes from one mind of a guy who's been making RPGs for 25 years or something like that. He's been in the industry. And it's his take on it. Like, nobody's in the way between Robert Schwab's weird, twisted brain and the RPG that you're playing at your table. It's all him. Now, I'm sure, when we play it, we'll probably run into bugs. We'll probably run into weird things. There'll probably be things we don't like. That's true with every RPG. Already, I said, I'm worried about the difficulty is really high at low tiers. What is that like when you get to later tiers? I don't know, but it looks still, I think all of those are things that I feel like I can manage, and I think the game is going to be really good. So that was my initial take on Shadow the Weird Wizard. I don't know when we're going to play a longer campaign, but when we do, I will certainly give more insight into my experiences with it. Right now, you can pick up Shadow the Weird Wizard. You can find links in the show notes. I highly recommend buying the physical version of the book. You get the physical version and the PDF together. It's 2 books, the Shadow the Weird Wizard player guide and the GM's guide. The reason I suggest getting it is because I don't know how big the print run is going to be. And if he runs out, I don't know if the book is making enough that he'll be able to do a whole other print run, and then you're kind of stuck with print on demand, which is going to be equally expensive, only not nearly of the high quality that the main source books are. So I would definitely recommend, if you're interested at all in it, I would recommend picking up the source book. If you're on the fence, then go ahead and get the PDFs and check out the PDFs for it. But the PDFs are also going to cost you some money, so I would probably get the physical book version from it. I have the 2 physical books, and I'm really happy I do because I think they're outstanding. So Soren Johnson, lead designer for Civilization 4, wrote on a blog, and he was quoting from a book I read a long time ago called A Theory of Fun by Ralph Koster. And he sort of summarizes it as to an idea that players, he says, where is it here? Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. His point is that a lot of and if you think about games like role-playing games in particular, when you have factors of randomness and you have factors of uncertainty, players gravitate towards certainty, that they want to reduce randomness. They want to reduce the chaos of a game and get it to the point where they can get very solid, consistent results. The problem is that solid, consistent results are boring. And it's not all players too, right? We're not going to group everybody together in this kind of thing, but it's definitely a factor of human nature that we want consistency. We want to remove chaos and randomness from it, and we want to have that kind of consistency. And we can find it that there are definitely certain players who remove that consistency, or are aiming to remove that consistency. And when you get to the point where you do, it turns out the game is no longer fun. An example is if you went to a slot machine in a casino and you put a quarter in. If you got to the point where every time you put a quarter in, that you'd always get 23 cents back, right? Every time. You'd never play, right? Even though that's kind of like what the odds are like. I don't know if the odds are actually like that. But it's that randomness that draws you in, even though what you're actually trying to seek is consistency. People love to find a pattern, even though they just have randomness. And we can find this in our RPGs. Kelsey Dionne really nailed this topic when she was on a podcast recently called The Dungeon Master's Diaries. And she mentioned something I thought was really interesting. She said that when she was looking at homebrew classes for Shadowdark, she could tell whether or not the homebrew classes were made by game masters or made by players. And the way she could tell was that players who made homebrew classes for Shadowdark often tried to put elements in the character class that eliminated the difficult parts of Shadowdark. For example, they can carry more stuff, or they have a better source of light, or they have a better way to deal with food, or they have better ways to deal with injury. They had ways to kind of deal with the very things that make Shadowdark unique in the first place. She said GMs kind of understand that you don't want to have that in there. But, she could tell, when she could see things like, oh, I really want this. And it was funny because my players after we were done with our Shadowdark campaign, talked about how, they loved it, but they were continually frustrated by the inventory system of having only so many slots of inventory they could pick and having to make the choices. And they were like, I wish we just had more. And I was like, if you had more, you wouldn't care, right? Like, we have more in D&D and inventory is never a problem. We never even talk about it. Like, it would just remove that whole aspect of play if you get it there. But what really kind of caught grabbed my tickled my brain, hearing Kelsey talking about that particular for classes, was the focus on defensive stuff. So players optimizing their fun out of a game is one thing, but I think that players also defend themselves out of the fun of a game. That one of the areas of randomness that many players particularly focus on is defense. They want to never be hit, never take any damage, never have to worry about any status effects, never have to worry about any kind of thing. And you can tell because there are ways, particularly in 5e and in D&D and all the 5e variants, there are lots of ways to optimize around that sort of thing. Getting better armor is one way. Getting magical armor is another. Picking certain class options is another. There are ways to just continually beef up your defense until eventually you're almost never going to get hit. Some examples would be, imagine a character, and this is all legal within the game. Obviously, you'd have to be pretty high level to get there. But you could have full, plate armor +3, which would give you a base AC of 21 right there. You add a +3 shield, and now you're at 26. And maybe you dip into, or maybe you take the Magic Initiate feat and get shield, and now you can have an AC of 31. That's 3 things. And it doesn't even matter what your abilities are at that point, as long as your ability is enough that you can wear plate armor, right? That in 3 moves, I got to 31 AC, right? And a 31 AC is ridiculously high, right? It would mean that somebody would have to have a 20 attack bonus to hit you half the time. So players gravitate towards that. And that's just armor class. There's also so many different spells and abilities and class options and things like that also lean on the defensive. And when you lean on the defensive, I had a player, and he's a great player and I love him, who used Blink a lot. And he just had the spell Blink, and he would cast it all the time. Now, the funny thing was the other characters also hated it because it meant that they were always taking the hits that he should be taking. And sometimes I would have monsters that would ready an attack that as soon as he blinks in, they would hit him, right? So there were still ways to deal with it, but there was a lot. One of the things that has been a bug in me for a long time is shield. Shield works well when it's just for wizards who don't have a really good armor class, but it is almost certainly the most powerful first level spell in 5e. Shield is, in my opinion, way overtuned. It does way too much. It stacks with advantage. It's easy to get with a 1-class dip. It's a spell that you can pick up a bunch of different ways. Shield is a problem, right? In my opinion, shield's a problem. And none of the current versions of 5e did anything to alleviate the challenge of shield, the spell shield. And that's because a +5 bonus to AC, even as a reaction, is super powerful, and gets more powerful the higher level you are and things like that. Then you have things like Rings of Resistance. You have things like the old Heroes Feast. Luckily, newer versions of Heroes Feast have dealt with the poison immunity a lot. But you could tell how much people loved Heroes Feast because poison immunity is infinitely powerful against poison-dealing monsters. It doesn't matter how much damage your ancient green dragon does with a poison breath. If you have poison immunity, you get rid of all of it, right? It's really powerful stuff. So there's lots of things that players can optimize for in order to remove their defense. But what can we as GMs do about this? So there's a few things that we want to do. The first thing is be super careful about offering the ability for characters to craft their own magic items, because they will craft defensive items to optimize their defensive capabilities. I would be very careful about letting people craft items, and I would have a direct hand in what items they're capable of crafting one by one. That's one where I feel like the 2024 Dungeon Masters Guide did a great disservice to Dungeon Masters by offering a crafting system that is far too easy to use. And if you implement it, it's bad. There was a GM who talked about this on EN World who said hey, I ran a 1 to 20 game. I think it's 3rd to 20th level D&D 2024 game. And they said, I saw the crafting item in there, so I put it in there. And my players made 10 Rings of Resistance each. that they were getting enough money, and since Rings of Resistance no longer have attunement, it meant they could wear 10 of them, and they resisted every character resisted every element type. I heard another player who said that his group, he offered it up, and his group, one of the players told everybody else, make sure to make armor that has the shield spell on it, craft that, and that way you have 6 castings of, every character has 6 castings of shield they can use every day. Right? Like the players will go for that. There's some players certainly will go for that. So, you don't have to tell them that they can't craft anything, but you want to put places in there that they can't craft 10 or whatever, 60 magic resistance rings or 6 suits of shield armor. Instead, you should know, what I do particularly for crafting is there's a particular element or a particular item component that they have to go get that is going to limit their ability to make a magic item. And I would also tell them, like, you can't use shield. Also, those enspelled weapons that have 6 castings, you shouldn't let them use 6 castings. They should be a single casting per day, not 6 castings per day. When you're handing out loot, be careful about handing out defensive loot. A ring of resistance here and there is not so bad. One player who's got resistance to fire is not so bad. +1 bonuses on armor are not so bad, but I might not put it on plate, right? I might not put it on the heavier armor. I might put the +1 bonuses on lighter armor, like studded leather armor or chain armor and things like that. I would not put any more than a +1 bonus on any armor, right? I think that if you start to put a +2, +3 bonuses on armor, you're going to have ACs that are going to go really high. I also would never give out a magical shield. If you give out a magical shield, don't give it, give a magical shield that has a spell effect on it, like an offensive spell effect or some other kind of utility spell effect rather than a defensive spell effect. And I wouldn't put a bonus on it. You can also do that with armor. You can give out really cool magic armor that doesn't have a bonus on it, but does have some other kind of fun effect. And that way the player is still driven to want to use that armor, even though the armor class on it's not particularly any better than the normal armor. So be very careful about what loot you give out and what defensive capabilities that loot is going to have for the characters, because players gravitate towards defense already, and they have so many different class-based ways of doing it through spells and class abilities and other things. If you start to add on magic items that do it, those will all stack together, and then they'll become even harder to threaten. And really what happens when the characters cannot be threatened is the game gets boring. It certainly gets boring for me as a GM, but it could also get boring for them. Or they're like, yeah, hey, look, I didn't get hit again. Hey, I haven't taken any damage in 3 sessions, right? Like, this is great. And then you throw in bigger and bigger monsters, and it gets to be a problem. Submarine spells. I have a friend who was a Navy submarine officer. He worked on a Navy submarine. And he told me an interesting anecdote. He said that when you went onto a submarine and you closed the hatch on the submarine and sealed it off and went off, there was only so much happiness that existed inside of the submarine. So that meant the only way you were going to get more happiness was by taking it from someone else. I always thought that was very funny. And what I realize is there are certain spells in 5e, and probably in other systems too, that I'm going to call from now on submarine spells, in naming it after his anecdote. A submarine spell is a spell where somebody's going to be unhappy. A player around the table is going to be unhappy. That player could be the GM. That player could be a player. An obvious example is Counterspell. Right? And Counterspell isn't necessarily an example of one where they're defending themselves out of the fun, but it's definitely a spell where somebody's sad, right? Either the GM is sad because their monster who is going to cast a big spell can't cast that big spell, or a monster casts Counterspell on a player who now just lost their turn casting a spell. Right? I think Level Up Advanced 5e has a really good way of handling the submarine, the counter spell, by saying you can cast another spell. You can use your reaction to cast a different spell of half the spell level of the one you had cast originally. So you don't lose your action. I really like that. That's not so bad. But there are other submarine spells as well. Shield is a little bit of a submarine spell, right? When a character, I'll tell you, if you want to see shield, you want to see players hate shield, give an ancient dragon shield, right? And then when one character attacks it, it throws up shield, and now it's got an AC of 31 and no one can hit it. See how much fun they're having? The answer is not much fun. That's kind of a submarine spell. When you cast it, the players become unhappy, right? Or characters become unhappy. It's a reason why you don't really want to have super high armor classes for monsters. It's kind of fun in some circumstances where you have a high AC monster, but monsters with armor classes higher than 18 or so Oh man, like players are sad. They want to hit things. Give it more hit points is not taking the fun away, right? You don't mind that a monster takes damage, and they certainly love doing damage. So that's one where we see a net growth in happiness over spells like Shield, where we see somebody is happy and somebody is unhappy. Circle of Power. This actually came up as a version of a submarine spell. Circle of Power. Let's pull it up here. So Circle of Power is a spell that it has existed for a long time. It existed in D&D 2014 for a long time. It is a 30-foot radius area, and creatures inside the area have advantage on saving throws against spells and magical effects. And when an affected creature makes a saving throw against a spell or magical effect that allows a save to take only half damage, they take no damage instead. Whenever you take like half damage to no damage, it's essentially infinite damage mitigation. Because it means that if I throw a, super upcast meteor swarm that does 1,000 points of damage, but they make their saving throw, they take 0. They take no damage. Circle of Power wasn't a problem because the only class that could actually use Circle of Power were Paladins. And since it was a 5th level spell, it meant that Paladins only got it at 17th level. But something happened with D&D 2024. So they expanded it out to Wizards and Clerics as well. So now it doesn't show up at 17th level. Now it shows up at 9th level. And I saw it for the first time in my Wednesday game a couple times back, where one of the players saw it and he read it and he goes, "Oh, Mike is going to nerf this." And I was like, "What?" And he said, "Circle of Power." And I read it and I was like, "Oh man," and I was like, I remember this, but like why wasn't this an issue before? And the answer was it didn't show up till 17th level before. And 17th level for something like this, A lot of people never make it to 17th level, but B, it was only one class that got it. Now, it was really powerful because a paladin could mix this with their aura that increased saving throws as well. And I remember running some 20th level one-shot games when I was doing some play testing. And I remember having a paladin that had Circle of Power plus this other aura going at the same time. And it meant that almost everybody was immune to like everything. Now, it's only magical effects, so it doesn't include breath weapons or other types of effects, but it can affect a lot of other things. So what do you do? This is an example of like a player is like, this is really great, I'm going to get it, but it's like, well, now every wizard they fight is going to, could in fact do no damage to them at all, right? 30-foot radius as well. It's a giant radius. So what do you do with that? Well, my answer is you lean in on it. If you know that they are going to cast something like that, you have a bunch of wizards and you have all those wizards hammering them with fireballs and the description of them with their aura up and the fireballs blasting against the aura. And maybe one of them fails a saving throw 1 point and gets, half damage or whatever. It's going to be rare, but you can really lean in on it. But the problem is now you're tuning your game around a single ability. And that's something that I see in 5e. I've witnessed this for 10 years, and it has not gotten better with the newer versions of the game. That what happens is certain characters will take certain options, and now because of that one particular option, you have to change how you run the game. And I think that that's always kind of an unfortunate design area. One area that's not really about defending out of the fun is the new Rogue Thief ability that allows you to use a magic item as a bonus action, or essentially use the magic action as a bonus action. So now every time I'm handing out a one-shot magic, a one-use magic item, or any item that the rogue can use that would normally take a magic action, I have to remember that the rogue can do it as a bonus action. And I have to ask myself, is that okay? Because they could also potentially use it twice, because you still get to use the magic action on your normal turn. And since they're not using spell slots, it means that they could technically trigger that magic item twice. So I was looking at like the Helm of Brilliance as an example. I rolled up a magic item. I rolled up Helm of Brilliance. Right? The Helm of Brilliance is a very rare magic item, but the characters are at a point where they're getting it. And you can start plucking stones off of this and using it. Diamonds, rubies, fire opals, and regular opals. The fire opals, you can cast spells like Fireball, Prismatic Spray with diamonds, Wall of Fire with rubies, Daylight with an opal. On a rogue, they could do 2 gemstones per turn, right? And that means they could do, I'm going to do Fireball and Prismatic Spray on one turn. Can you imagine doing Fireball and Prismatic Spray? Or even just using 2 diamonds and doing Prismatic Spray twice? Or doing a Wall of Fire plus a Fireball, right? That's a lot of stuff. And that's one where I would probably talk to the player and I'll be like, look, this is a bit overtuned. Are you cool with the idea that if you're using the magic action as your bonus action, you can't also use it as your main action? I think that feels fair to me. For all I know, the rules might work that way, but as far as I can tell, and from what I had read, I don't see anything that tells me that because you're using the magic action as a bonus action, that you cannot use it also as your action. But let's find out. Level 3, Fast Hands. This is the Rogue Thief subclass. Use an object. Take the Utilize action or take the magic action to use an item that requires an action. And that's as a bonus action, you can do one of the following. So there is nothing limiting the Rogue from using the magic action twice. But I would definitely say, hey, how about you don't do that, right? Because then I'm going to have to say, no, I can never give out any items like this, right? Like the only alternative is I can't give out items like this, or else I have a rogue who's never doing any rogue stuff. And this is where it comes back to that idea of optimizing your way out of the fun. Is it really fun for a rogue to do nothing but magic actions with magic items? They never do sneak attack. They never use their other stuff. They never use any of the other kind of abilities that you would expect a rogue to do, because all they're doing is triggering magic items over and over and over again, because that turned out to be the far best one. They went to the slot machine, they found the one that gives the outcome where they pull it every time, and they just pull that one over time. Somebody's getting bored. I'm either getting bored, they're getting bored, the game is getting stale, because they're just, they're out wizarding the wizard, because the wizard can't do that, right? The wizard can't cast 2 spells a turn, but the rogue's like bang, 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 bang. So these are all things that we have to kind of keep an eye out for. And they're all things that we have to sort of pay attention to. And there's a lot of different ways that we can deal with it. Some of them are just talk to your players, right? Have a conversation with your players. Some of it is being careful about the kind of stuff that you give out. Some of it is other things that you can do on your side. So another example is Dreadful Blessings. I've talked about Dreadful Blessings before. This is sort of my take on the Doom Point system from Tales of the Valiant. Dreadful Blessings are a limited number of options that boss monsters can use to break the rules of the game. And in my case, I would use them for something like the monster drops your circle of power with a Dreadful Blessing for this turn, and then hammers you with a meteor swarm, right? So that they can only do it so many times, but this guy can do it that one time. You want to be a little careful about using Dreadful Blessings for just getting rid of things that the players use. So I would not use it all the time to always get rid of something. Like you don't want to change your game around so the thing that the player used, they just can't use anymore. But if they've gotten a lot of use out of Circle of Power, you want to tell them, like in this case, this one guy, he's going to be able to drop it for a turn. Right. And they'll understand why. And they also know the limitation that exists there. So that's another way to deal with it. But the main one is I think the biggest tip that I can give you out of this is just keeping in mind that this sort of thing exists, right? That there is this option for optimizing, the characters will optimize their way out of the fun. And particularly, I think we see it a lot on the defensive side of defending themselves out of the fun. And it's something that we need to keep an eye on. It's something that we might want to talk to our players about. It's something that we want to think about when we're offering rewards. There's lots of different areas where we want to consider the fact that players are going this way. And I think it's sort of a bit of a design thing that, developers of video games have recognized for a long time. And we can sort of recognize that too. Let's do some Patreon questions. Every quarter, I put up a new thread on the Sly Flourish Patreon for people to ask their questions. They can ask one question a month. I answer every question every Friday, and then some of those questions I bring here to the show so that we can dive deeper. Hussein B. says, my group recently started a new level 5 adventure. During session 0, all the players wanted to keep using their level 3 characters from the last campaign, so the group started at level 3 instead of 5. We are 2 sessions in, and so far the encounters have not been a problem. I've been keeping my hands on the monster dials, and the players are enjoying the extra challenge. My question is, how do you recommend I recalibrate them to the campaign's power level? The 2 options I see are 1, be more generous with magic items, or 2, level up more frequently. I feel like I can do both. I feel like both can be fun for the party since players love leveling up and players love having extra magic items. Which route do you feel will be more fun for the players? Getting right to the topic I had before, what might be most fun for the players initially might be the way that optimizes the way out of the fun, which would be more magic items. I would recommend leveling them up more quickly. The nice thing about that is the things that are occurring with levels, if you give too many magic items out, then they're always going to have those magic items. You can't really ever take them away. You can, but then you'd be a dick. So I would feel like instead of trying to be more generous with magic items to get them to scale up, I would just lower the level or speed up how fast you are leveling them up. Change things a little bit so maybe the milestones that they're leveling on are a bit quicker. I'm also assuming you're using milestone leveling, but that's kind of, that could depend. But either way, you can sort of increase things so that they're leveling up a little faster than they might normally level up. The other answer is keep it the way it is, because it depends on what adventure you're running. But sometimes it doesn't scale up so high that 2 levels is really going to make that big a difference. And it might make the adventure a little bit more challenging. Adventures are not super tight. Most adventures are not super tight about their difficulty when you're running them. And you're going to have your hands on the dials anyway, regardless of what level they are. So it's really up to you to decide when you want to do it. Another way is side quests. You can drop side quests in there that they can accomplish, and the side quests get them to the level that you want. But I probably wouldn't worry about it too much. I would run the game as you run it, and if there are options for the characters to level up a little faster, that's probably fine. But I don't think that I would worry about it. I don't think I'd worry about it too much. Nathan G says, do you find many differences in how you run epic heroic style 5e games versus Shadowdark? I'm making good on my 2025 goal of getting a Shadowdark group together, and I run a lot of 5e. Any tips for leaning into emergent storytelling? Yeah, I have a few tips of these, and I've talked about, if you look at my Shadowdark retrospective that I did after having run a year-long Shadowdark campaign, I have a lot of tips there. Probably the biggest one is building whatever your story arc is, so that it's not built around any particular character or set of characters, but instead built around a character's faction or background. And that way, when they bring new characters in, you can tie the characters to those factions. And that way, they still have the same quest that their original character had. So the example here where I realized this was like the characters all went into a dungeon. The dungeon was a long crawl, and a lot of them died on the way. It was early on in the game, and a lot of the characters died, and the new characters showed up. But the new characters had different motivations than the ones that went in there. And then suddenly the game kind of took this different turn because the characters went in to acquire one thing, but the characters who were there are like, well, we don't care about acquiring that thing. And that was kind of a mess. And we got back on track, but it was a little bit of a mess. So instead, what you could do is say, like, all of the characters work for one of these 3 factions, but all 3 of those factions have a goal of stopping Mugdalblub from destroying the Gloaming, right? Like that, if you have that quest, that sort of main arc, and that tie the arc to the factions so that when a new character comes in, they still have the same goal and motivation for what they're doing, even if they're a brand new character, that still keeps the game on track. So that way, the story of the game is more abstract from the individual characters, so that if they switch characters out because characters die, and they die often in Shadowdark, they're still on the same path. They're still going after the same thing. There's still the main drive that is driving the rest of it. That is probably my number one goal for keeping a sort of heroic story going, even when you're turning through characters because they are dying a lot in Shadowdark. So that's probably my number one tip. Ryan M. says, a question for during or after your mid-February 2025 Monster Manual review. If I'm at the table running a published adventure that references an SRD monster I accidentally didn't prep for, which book should I grab to get the most table-usable monster? Assume I have all the core monster books from the various major 5e flavors, digital and physical. And by table usable, I'm thinking that it means in order of priority, 1, has the same name so I can find it, 2, the stat block is straightforward to run, and 3, it hits at its CR. Right now, I really like the 2025 Monster Manual. I think it's really good. And I have been, for my Wednesday game and my every other week game, which is it's a D&D 2014 game. I have been reaching more and more for the D&D 2025 Monster Manual. The monsters hit really well. They are easy to run at the table. They hit at their CR. The names match up for the most part. There's only like those odds and ends like drow. But again, like the idea of like, I'll just use any humanoid stat block for a drow and I'll just add drow effects in my head. That can certainly work well. But I think the reason that I'm reaching for it is it's the newest book. And I'm kind of excited to have it, and it's a newest book, and off I go. In a year, I'm not sure, because I still go back to maybe I'm better off just building a quick monster using Forge of Foes stats. I now have like my Forge of Foes rapid monster stats in my head, where I can just build monster stats very, very quickly based on a challenge rating, and then I can kind of tune that monster how I want. To me, that's almost as good as anything that I would get out of a monster manual. In many cases, like there's weird complications to monsters that I find in monster books where I'm like, well, that doesn't really fit the situation I've got now, but I'm able to improvise better when I'm able to use my own stats really quickly. So, I would say like when on the one you want, having the monster stats by challenge rating And I'll tell it to you. I'll speak this out. You can write this down while you're listening. The quick monster stats, I've checked these against pretty much all of the different monster books, and I think they hold up rather well. The armor class and difficulty class of a monster is equal to 12 plus half its challenge rating, rounding down. So now you've got AC and DC. Hit points of the monster are somewhere between 15 and 20 times its challenge rating. You can kind of pick. Is it 15 times challenge rating or 20 times challenge rating? Its attack bonus and primary skills are 4 plus 1/2 of its challenge rating rounded down. And primary ability would be like, what's the ability score that it's best at? Is it good at strength? Is it good at intelligence? Is it good at wisdom and stuff like that? The other stats, when you need them, you improvise. They're somewhere between 0 and whatever its primary stat bonus would be. But that also works for its attack bonus. So the attack bonus of the monster is equal to 4 plus 1/2 of its challenge rating rounded down. And damage is 7 times challenge rating. That's the total damage the monster does. You can divide that into 2 attacks or 3 attacks or 4 attacks. If an attack hits multiple characters, then you divide that by 2. So if it does a breath weapon, you would do 3.5 per challenge rating instead of 7 per challenge rating. With those stats in your head, you can build any monster at any challenge rating you want. And then you can improvise all of the different effects and abilities and other details of the monster as you go. But I find that like having that in my head, like I just recited that, I didn't even have to look at anything. Just having that in my head lets me build any monster that I want at pretty much any challenge rating, and then I can improvise that monster a lot. I think that might be even better than any monster book that you're going to find. Christopher S. says, at some point, I'd love for you to tell us your experiences with A5E, Level Up Advanced 5e, comparisons and contrasts, the good and the bad, etc. I've been running 2 different A5E games, one where I've slowly switched to A5E, and one that started as A5E pure, no house rules. I'm finding that skills with expertise often yield quite higher results than the DCs I set for them. 5 for easy, 10 for moderate, 15 for hard, 20 very hard, 25 nearly impossible, 30 why bother but okay. I'm curious on you and your players' take on it. Also, I can't wait until the Level Up Gateway is ready for all, so my players can use it. Making a character in A5e is a bit more complicated, and as a GM, remembering all the little triggers, destiny, inspiration, features, backgrounds that can all be lightning rod. I'll be straight with you. I did not find Level Up Advanced 5e as fun to play and run, and neither did my players as other 5e variants. I feel like it sort of leaned in on the extra complications of the game. And as one of my players said, like those extra complications weren't worth the extra effort. I brought it to the players. They did not come to me saying, hey, we want a crunchier 5e. I was like, hey, let's try this version of 5e. But I did, and we did it, and players, and I still have 3 players who are playing A5e characters. So what I did is I started off by saying, we're going to have an A5e game. And we had an A5e game. And then partway into it, I did have players who were like, you know, my on-call player in particular, who is like, he's not going to keep up and constantly upgrade his character. And if he ever had to upgrade by 2 levels, it was a lot of work. And plus they didn't have all the books and stuff like that. And getting it extra, he was just like, it feels like I'm doing a whole lot of extra math for not a whole lot of extra gain. And so what I said was, I want everybody to have fun, so I'm going to open it up. You can play any 5e character you want. You can play A5e, you can play D&D 2024, you can play D&D 2014, you can play Tales of the Valiant, you can play whatever you want to know, whatever you want to play. 3 of my players continued to play their A5e characters. We have an A5e wizard, an A5e, the warlord class, whose name escapes me, the class name escapes me. Herald? I don't think it's a herald. I can't remember what it's called. And an A5e paladin, who's I think is known as a herald. So they changed the class names, which also kind of annoys me a little bit. I know that there are a reason. A marshal, thank you. Lord Bard says that was a marshal. Yeah, so we have an A5e marshal, we have an A5e herald, and an A5e wizard. The marshal is continuing to play the marshal because there isn't any other. He could switch over to be like a bard, like a battle bard or whatever, but he decided to stay with A5e, and that's fine, right? And they're so half the players are still playing with A5e characters and they're still enjoying it. But a lot of the A5e complicated aspects I've sort of hand waved away now. I don't really pay attention to expertise. The players still pay attention to expertise when they're playing those. But then I have a couple of players who are playing D&D 2024 characters now. And both of them switched over from their A5e ones, and they're much happier with the D&D 2024 characters. Just not even just from like power, because in fact one of them went way down in power. He was doing a lot more damage with A5e, and then switched to D&D 2024, and now has more utility but less damage. And he's like, yeah, but I like the options better. He's got more things that he's doing. He's also the rogue that is able to cast 2 magic items on a turn. So yeah, so my feeling is I really love A5e on the GM side. I think that the Trials and Treasure and Monsters Menagerie books are fantastic books to help augment your 5e games. I think there's a lot of cool rules from A5e, like the idea of safe havens, like the idea of resources, of what are they called? Supply. I think there's a lot of really good options in there. The idea of strife as a status effect, a lot of things I really like. But I did find that the game was kind of too crunchy. And as you say, not having an online character builder for a game that's this crunchy clearly showed that difference. And then seeing what like a high fantasy game like Shadow the Weird Wizard can be like, that is far easier to do on like a character sheet. That I think is a big difference as well. So those are kind of my thoughts on A5e. I was going to do a longer segment, and I might at some point do a longer segment where I talk about A5e, but you asked, so it's here. And actually this answers Sam M's question as well, who said, I know you use A5e books for monsters and prep, but have you run or played much with actual A5e? I'm curious how the martial maneuvers play out. If they slow play down, how do they feel compared to spells, and if they're too much for someone just wanting to play a simple character? My experience is that they are not too much in what they do, but they were too much in the idea of too many options, and then my players felt like there were too many trap options. There were too many ways where it's like, I'm never going to want to take this set because they're clearly worse than the other set. I think that the weapon masteries from D&D 2024 and the weapon maneuvers that are in Tales of the Valiant offered the same kind of capability in much smaller amount of rules, which meant it was way easier to take. Of those, I really like the Tales of the Valiant ones because you do those instead of doing damage. And I really like that idea. In fact, Shadow the Weird Wizard also does this, where you can do these extra maneuvers when you're attacking with a weapon, but you do them instead of doing damage. If you wanted a house rule for weapon masteries in order to kind of bound things, that could be something that you could do. You could, for example, say for Topple, you can attempt Topple, but if you hit, you don't do any damage, and instead you invoke a saving throw. That would be a nerf, definitely, to Topple. But if you find that the weapon masteries in 2024 are just over the top, that could be a house rule that would bound things a bit. And that is the way that Tales of the Valiant handles it. And I find it to work better. So yeah, by too much, I didn't think that the weapon maneuvers in A5e were too much as in power creep, but they were too much in just the sheer number of options. It was like 120 pages of character options. And that was too much. It was too much material. And Tales of the Valiant and D&D 2024 with the weapon maneuvers and weapon masteries, I think were an easier one to bring into the game that added that extra power. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, please consider subscribing to the Sly Flourish newsletter. It is absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a weekly RPG-related email sent directly to your inbox. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, resources, a whole dedicated podcast, access to our Discord server. There's a whole lot of things that patrons of Sly Flourish get, but most of all, you help me directly. You help me directly to put on shows like this, and you can pick up any of my books, including City of Arches, Forge of Foes, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, The Lazy DM's Companion, and more at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Please check out all of the links down in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.